O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down in the driver's seat and when I rise up through the gears. You discern my thoughts from a car. As a minister, I find myself spending a lot of time in my car, going from place to place, person to person, and meeting to meeting. And usually I listen to the radio or podcasts or audiobooks as I drive. But sometimes I just sit in silence, drowning in my own thoughts. It's been while in the car that I've had my best ideas. Something has hit me that I've never considered before. Something that has occurred to me that has changed my direction in life. So I thought I would ask a number of people if I could sit with them in their car and discuss something that is meaningful to them. Now, that could be religious or spiritual. It could be to do with politics. It might be linked to a societal issue or ethics. It might be all of those things or none of them. So I invite you to mirror, signal and maneuver with me as we discern my guest's thoughts from a car. I'm very glad to have Reverend Cheryl Meban with me in her car, and Jay's in the back just for editorial oversight.
Exactly.
So just start off by asking Charlie if you would just give us a little bit of your background and what you do and how you got there and all that sort of stuff.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Meban, the Rev. I'm chaplain at the Ulster University in Jordanstown in Belfast. The Jordanstown campus will soon be moving into Belfast, and this is where we're parked this morning, is right beside the new Belfast campus, which is also the oldest part of the Ulster University, because the Art College campus would be over 150 years old now, I think. We're sitting between St Anne's Cathedral on our left and the new Belfast campus of the Ulster University on our right, in the heart of Belfast, and a part that is coming back to life, hopefully, as we emerge from pandemic, and also as we emerge from the troubles and from the credit crunch crash and the emptying out of the city, that happened during the troubles, and then the stalling of rejuvenation that happened because of global economic crisis. And now we've had a global pandemic, and we've only got a climate emergency to deal with now, so that should be easy.
And we'll have the full set.
We'll have the full set. That will get us going. So it's a sort of a place of hope and history, and wrestling against degeneration, and trying to bring life and a future back to a city, and back to a country, and back to a world.
And how long have you been the chaplain here?
Since 2007. How many years is that?
That's lots.
14.
14, my goodness.
It'll be 14 in September. Yeah.
Of course, I know you from Union Theological College.
We were at college together. Yeah.
26 years ago we started.
Yeah. Of course, you were never there, so we didn't really get to know each other at that time.
Mervyn and I shared our time at college.
But an interesting bunch of people going through college at that time.
Yeah.
With the Reverend Tracy McRoberts, who's now minister at Shankle Road in the Church of England, although she wasn't a candidate for ordination in those days.
No.
And certainly wasn't Presbyterian. William Crawley, who has gone off to the BBC, and very different trajectory.
Yes, yeah.
All sorts of interesting people doing interesting things.
Indeed. And really that was the apex of theological education there, because before it wasn't very good, and certainly after we left it wasn't very good,
And while we were there?
While we were there, it was near perfection.
Well, interestingly enough, it was what it was, and I'm trying to learn to be less critical of things for being what they are. It's not to just leave things shoddy, but to be a bit more gracious and accept that a lot of the time people are doing their best, and they work with what they've inherited.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
That doesn't mean we have to leave things where they are.
And we're sitting here in your car, which is a Ford something. I can see Ford on the steering wheel.
So the chassis is basically a Fiesta.
Right.
It's a little chassis, but it's kind of built higher up, so it looks like a bigger car. But actually, it's only a 1 litre. It's an EcoBoost.
Oh, right, okay.
So that made me think, it sounds like it's not going to kill the planet. And it's a whole lot more efficient on petrol than my Ford Focus was that I inherited from my dad.
Ah, right.
So that's quite nice on my pocket, I have to say.
It's relatively clean, I have to say, compared to mine, which is just a Petri dish on wheels.
Well, I don't know. It's really, this car is mostly used for taking dogs to parks.
Okay.
But I do tend to use blankets to try and make them sit on and bring the mud to the blanket rather than into the car, because otherwise the car gets turns into a complete beach. You're actually sitting on quite a lot of sand from yesterday.
Yes. I feel it, which means I'm a princess.
I'm sure that's what it means.
I'm sure there's a scientific backing and a basis for all of that. And would you describe yourself, what sort of driver would you describe yourself as?
Oh, well, I am learning to be a bit more chilled.
Okay.
My husband calls me his getaway driver.
Okay.
So maybe that tells you more about what my instincts are.
Or about what Alan does.
My driving my driving instructor hauled me in one day and said, "Stop that car! You're driving like Nigel Mansell." So that's the kind of way I drive, and I think I inherited that from my dad. There's a little bit of that sort of alpha male.
Is that the overdeveloped right leg muscle? Is it heavy right foot?
You have to get there as fast as possible. You know, time is of the essence, and you shouldn't be wasting time. And I'm trying to learn to be a bit more chilled and to use less fuel and also be less wound up by other people not knowing where they're going or what they're doing, or just being just atrociously bad drivers. And I'm trying to just chill out and say, that it's not their fault. They can't all be me, obviously.
Yes, well, obviously.
And I'm obviously the best driver.
You're obviously the best driver in this car. And Jay can't drive, and you haven't seen me drive.
Well, I'm the best driver when I'm driving, So, it's funny how that driving brings out your kind of, is it original sin?
Yes, they say you never really learn to swear until you learn to drive.
Right.
And I think I can attest to that. I'm sure other people are much better human beings than me.
Yeah, I did a thought for the day one time about the woman who overtook me and me shouting out the window at her. It doesn't bring out the best in us. In fact, I remember even a cartoon they showed us when we were kids about, it was Goofy or somebody, who was really nice, pleasant man, but when he got behind the wheel of a car, he turned into this aggressive monster. And actually,
nothing's really changed.
There was truth in that story of our nature being changed by the amount of power we're given. And the more power you have, the more likely you are to abuse it and take risks, not just for your own life, but with other people's lives.
Yeah.
And I think that probably applies to my kind of latest bee in my bonnet, which is the climate emergency. And
This is Thoughts from a Car, which is a sort of podcast to try and ask people what's important to them. It could have been what's important to them when they were younger and continues to be important to them, or something that they've just sort of realized in recent times, or so. What's the thing that you're passionate about at the minute?
Well, it's this drivenness to faster, more. I see colleagues, I suppose a lot of my friends, my first degree was in law, and I see a lot of my very successful friends driving nicer and nicer cars and bigger cars, and I don't blame them, because they're surrounded by other people, and we're very much shaped in our expectations of ourselves by the people around us. But I'm concerned that our whole society is caught in a kind of a whirlpool of acquisitiveness and needing more and more stuff, more and more power. And of course, the more power you have, the more you get, and the more you get, the more you want. And the rich get richer, as I'm sort of observing as I get older and watch successive economic crises, and see how the rich are always capable of readjusting their finances to protect themselves, where the poor are left behind. So Dyson votes backs Brexit and then leaves the country. And you think, yeah, that's all right for you. The rest of us are here left with the mess that you've created. So lots of thoughts around that, but recently thinking more and more about the fact that if we don't actually catch on as a human race, we're going to wipe out massive portions of the population in wars over water, over safe places to live.
Dry places to live, that's
dry places to live, wet places to live, places that have not either turned into desert or been flooded by rising sea levels. And in 2010, at the World Communion of Reformed Churches General Council, there's a man from Tuvalu who stood up and told us about what it's like to be living on an island that is going underwater, knowing that that's your ancestral heritage and it's just disappearing, and the rest of the world doesn't seem to care, and the rest of the world's causing it, not you. And the injustice of that, and the loss of culture that goes with that. And of course the disempowerment that goes with people who are driven off their own culture and heritage and place and have to go and be migrants, be outsiders somewhere else, and deal with all the hostility that comes with that when people are going, oh, they're taking our jobs, and blaming migrants for not being us, when in fact they are us. They're just us born in different places. So yeah, then John Barry from Queen's got in touch and asked me to talk to a group of climate activist folk with a faith perspective. I said, well, I can only give my faith perspective on a report that had come out from Friends of the Earth. And that triggered some conversations, and John really saying, I'm not a committed Christian, but I do think that the faith communities have a lot to offer in terms of bringing the whole person and whole communities and the pastoral care that's required alongside activism. So he said, he's teaching cohorts of students and they're leaving traumatized with the disaster that is the ecology and the direction things are going. And he wants help to care for these people and also to make life livable for them, because there's no point in them being so distressed that they just give up. And so that's really made me ask hard questions of the gospel.
You obviously see a link between this desire to acquire things and climate change. But is there a link can there be a link between faith and climate change?
Well, so that's my question is does the Christian faith have anything to offer? And of course John Barry reminded me that Pope Francis, who of course was named after Saint Francis of Assisi, who loved nature, all of nature, and cared for it, and insisted that a portion of the Ferrari be left for wildflowers. Even back then, that he's written Laudato Si, which is a quote from St. Francis, and that encyclical Laudato Si is very much taking in all the scientific understandings of what's going on in terms of climate change, but connecting it to Christian faith and Christian theology. Now, I haven't finished reading it yet because it only arrived yesterday, but that's what I'm thinking about and trying to get my head around is how do we take our gospel of stewardship, or our sense of God having placed us in this world and God having made this world beautiful and good, and when the human beings arrive, the text says, and it was very good. And you would wonder now whether there was another Noah's Ark scenario, because are we actually wrecking the place and making it rather less good than it would have been without us? Which is really quite sad to know that the way Christian culture has become co-opted by empires that built their money on slavery and on taking lands from people and wealth from people, and accumulating that for themselves, and creating imbalances of power that just shredded the natural relationships between people and the world they lived on. So our faith was co-opted by those empires a couple of hundred years ago. I mean, you could say, go back to Constantine and say that's been a tradition. That's what happens. But Christian faith was born, and when you go back to Jesus, he's offering a different kind of kingdom that is alternative to the Roman Empire, but not trying to overthrow it, but trying to change it from within. So he talks about his kingdom being like leaven, so yeast in the bread, and I like making bread, and thinking about how the kind of confidence and faith and compassion and commitment to justice that is in Jesus can be needed through a whole society in a way that can transform the society from within, just as a lump of dough has changed. Nobody ever looks at a lump of dough and says there's some nice yeast. You don't see the yeast doesn't get the glory, but the dough becomes this gorgeous loaf of bread. And that's a combination of hard work in the kneading and then also of time to rest. And I think actually there's something in that for us in terms of keeping our activism in check and daring to trust and to just be and to, let things be what they are. But then also there are times for pushing and pulling and shoving to insist that, for example, slavery was wrong. There's times when you have to militate for abolition. There's times when so now I think there are times for us to militate for change in the global financial economic architecture, all the ways that the flows of money and power go around the world. You can either just accept that is something too big for any of us to change, or you can say, well, just as slavery was completely supporting empires and the empires are never going to let go of it, you could still challenge it, and people did, and they trusted in something deeper in humanity than power, which was a compassion and a mercy and a sense of justice.
Certainly power is a powerful drug for humans. I mean, it makes people do wild, stupid, crazy things.
Like me when I'm driving.
Well, what do you think the church's response to this idea of empires and climate change and acquisition of more and more things? I mean,
we've got a long way to go on this. I was reading up in preparation for last Sunday, and the church I was in, somebody else had chosen the hymns, and the final hymn was Stand Up for Jesus. So I looked up the story of this hymn and found that there had been this Episcopalian called Reverend Dudley Ting, who's
he could only be an Episcopalian, a name like
and
that.
His sorry, there's a traffic warden coming, so I'm just checking that my car parking still works. Is it still going? Because I don't want to be. Oh, yes, I'm still paying. That's all right. Don't want to get done while we're talking. Dudley Ting, so was the son of an Episcopalian minister in Philadelphia, and when his father retired, he took on his father's church, as you do. I was really surprised that was how it was passed on, but anyway, it was passed on to him, and the text said his father was more moderate, and after 2 years of him preaching as an abolitionist, in other words, as an extremist, he was pushed out. He had to leave. I was struck by the idea that the abolition of slavery was seen as an extreme view. And, so it meant that the man had to leave. And I was also encouraged that it was thought of as an extreme view, but I don't think our churches today would argue that slavery was a good thing or a normal thing or something that,
So do you think in terms of climate change, the church is split?
I think the church is caught at the moment because we are compromised, and it looks extreme for us to say, well, we're going to disinvest from fossil fuels. in order to make the point that we need to change our lifestyles and not be relying for our economic well-being on things that are destructive of the planet. There are probably problems with renewables as well. But any improvements, probably an improvement. And it's about changing our mindset so that we can find ways to shift to daring to trust in God and this environment that God has given us, to give us enough to live and to live abundantly and well, and to enjoy all the glorious beauty. The phrase that came to my mind the other day was a gospel of radical enoughness. And people have mixed feelings about the word enough because it sounds mean to some people, like it's only just enough. And I think radical enoughness includes abundance, but it's an abundance that inspires generosity and also is willing to receive generosity from others and grow from the experience of receiving as well as from giving. And we're all losing out, while some of us have so much that we wouldn't like to be dependent on anybody else. That mindset is actually probably pretty toxic and pretty antithetical to really receiving the grace that God wants to give us. I've often said that to understand the gospel, you need to be an outsider in some way, a foreigner or marginalised, because then you realise what it means when you see Jesus encountering all of these outcasts and affirming them and welcoming them in and standing up for them against the righteous objectors.
Yes.
So in the same way, I think we've got to do some of that kind of work, and I'm only at the beginning of this, but we've got to do some of that kind of work with our attitude to material wealth. And
there's certainly some churches, especially in America, but getting more and more common over here, would teach a sort of prosperity gospel, where that if you're poor, if you're struggling, it's because you don't have enough faith. And if you're wealthy, it's because you've been blessed by God, and God wants to give you more and more and doesn't want anybody to be poor. But if you're poor, well, that's your fault.
It doesn't occur to anybody that if somebody's poor, that's an opportunity for them to share what they have. The poor person is a gift to them.
That sounds like socialism.
But I love the way we throw these labels at things. Oh, Marxist, oh, communist, oh, socialist, as if that's enough to shut it up. So Dudley Ting was an extremist because he preached against abolition. What I meant to say was that when he was dying, having had a farming accident, they asked him, what are we going to say to the rally of people that have come to hear your preaching? And he said, tell them to stand up for Jesus. And so his friend George Duffield then wrote the hymn stand up for Jesus. So that's the origin of that. So that makes that reconfigures the whole Soldiers of the Cross.
It's no longer because culture wars, and they're not saying Christmas, they're saying Xmas. We'll stand up for Jesus and make sure it's put the Christ back in Christmas. It's actually was something more radical. It was more profoundly human.
And it's put on the gospel armour. And if we're going to say, what is that gospel armour? It's the fruit of the Spirit, and it's the kind of, trusting in the enoughness of what God gives us, our faith and hope and generosity and justice. And I can't, off the top of my head, think what the Ephesians 6 armour is, which I used to know all by heart, but haven't been focusing on the armour. But the gospel of peace. Shout the gospel of peace, and you have a belt of salvation, which is salvation is also wholeness or healing. Much more than just getting bums into heaven.
Yes.
Did I say bums? Bums on pews is what we normally say. It's not just about snatching people from the fires of hell, but it's actually about a wholeness of a new creation that Christ has come to offer and to bring. And the proclaims is now here, and he sends out his disciples. Don't bring a bag, don't bring extra money, don't bring doubles of anything, no second tunic. You go out and you meet people and they'll look after you, and you tell them that the kingdom of God is here. And he is teaching them to rely on God providing for them. And I just wonder, are we willing to do that now? And I think we're probably actively discouraging our young people from that kind of life of faith, from those kind of experiences of going in and daring to trust in God to feed us. Maybe we should bring a begging bowl with us on our on our walks and dare to believe that actually there's worse things than being taken for a beggar. I think a lot of the time we just behave like chimpanzees, and if you see the way chimpanzees behave, I mean, they're very cute, and I love mammals, but social mammals are very nice to people who conform, and they're very nice to people in the in-group, but highly competitive and aggressive when it comes to competing for resources.
Yeah.
And I can't help believing that we are called to be better than that we're called to be human rather than just social mammals.
Yeah. I mean, that occurred to me whenever the first lockdown happened and you went into a supermarket, you queued to get into the supermarket, you eventually got in and shelves had been cleared. As usual, toilet rolls, paracetamol,
bread flour.
Yeah, everything had gone.
Yeah.
People panicked and suddenly, they weren't taking what they needed, they were taking more than they needed, and obviously that caused other people to have nothing.
Yeah.
But then that was part of our fear of not having enough.
Yeah.
And so we acquire and gather together as much as we can. We build our barns and build bigger barns, we load them up and then we're dead.
And social mammals don't build barns. I mean, they're smart enough to know in the end to trust. They just don't take it as far as we do.
Yeah.
But at some point we need to leave that kind of chimpanzee thinking behind, and stop seeing each other as the enemy and the threat, and dare to trust in a deeper goodness at the heart of the universe. And it comes down to that. It comes down to, do we trust that God, even if I starve because I refuse to kill anybody to protect my resources, do I believe that the deepest goodness at the heart of the universe will sort that injustice out, rather than putting my trust in putting my trust in the defending myself, violence, power, just making sure that I get what I need, and not trusting in goodness. Actually saying, no, there's times when evil's better. Is that really what we're saying? And I think for us as a church, we have to think a lot harder about the compromises that we've made and are continuing to make, and probably will continue to make for a long time to come. But some of the things we learned in the past are an encouragement to me that we can continue to learn. So I don't want to give up on being a bit idealistic and extremist in my views, if those extreme views are maybe the future. So the people who were trying to abolish slavery must have felt that they were up against insurmountable odds, but they nonetheless persevered because the alternative was unthinkable, the injustice was unacceptable. And that's how I feel about the climate injustice and the impacts on people and animals across the world. So we've got to do our best and hope that we can make a difference. And if not, well, die trying.
And on that positive note, I'd like to say thank you to Cheryl Meban for her thoughts from a car. Like most people and organisations, COVID-19 has hit us financially. Because we're a church, you think we'd be accustomed to asking people for money, but I don't like doing that. So that's why we've produced this podcast. So if you feel that you would like to donate something, no matter how large or small, you can go to our webpage at www.firstchurchbelfast.org and click on the donate button and give whatever you can, and it would be much appreciated. Thank you.